clock in, scrub up, and join us behind the red line. You're listening to First Case, a perioperative podcast bringing you exciting interviews, engaging discussions, and innovative solutions that are changing the way patients receive surgical care. Each episode, we talk to frontline staff, perioperative leadership, and nursing entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the back table to the boardroom, from wheels in to wheels out, we tackle the real-life issues affecting the OR. Whether you're tuning in for surgical service education or inspiration, we're glad you're here. And now it's time to roll back and start the first case.
Welcome to First Case. We are currently in between season 13 and season 14 on the podcast, but you are in luck because for the next 5 episodes, we are going to be giving you the audio interviews from Perioperative Nurses Week. During Perioperative Nurses Week, we traveled to England, to New Zealand, to South Africa, to Spain, and to the United States to look at perioperative nurses around the world and to help us gain a global understanding of the impact of perioperative nursing. And you might not have been able to watch the videos. You might not have had time to check out the YouTube channel, but we're bringing it to you on our audio channels. So sit back and relax and join us during this mid-season for a look at perioperative nursing around the world. Happy Perioperative Nurses Week. This week, we are highlighting perioperative nurses from across the globe and celebrating the international impact of OR nurses. And today, we're speaking with Andrew Veitch, who is currently an OR nurse in California, but is originally from South Africa. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's such a pleasure, and I'm glad you asked me. Really cool to chat.
Yeah. Well, we had a great conversation at the expo earlier this year, and it was great to connect with you in person there. So also, I'm just incredibly honored to have you back for this segment on OR nurses. Since you are from South Africa, I'd love to hear about your experience. But before we start there, let me stop talking about you and let you introduce yourself to everyone who's watching.
Okay, cool. Well, I'm Andrew. I'm originally from Cape Town, South Africa. I've been in the States now 23 years. I grew up in Cape Town. I was born in Cape Town, grew up in Cape Town, and did my registered nurse training in South Africa as well, in Cape Town, at Carinus Nursing College, which was part of the University of Cape Town at the time. And it was a 4-year training program. So in that respect, it's a little bit different from the States. We don't have prerequisites. You literally finish high school the first week of December, and first week of January, you start in nursing school.
Really?
At the university or the college of nursing. And it is 4 years of solid nursing training. So that's what I did. I didn't really know what I wanted to do initially. I had been a paramedic already, in which I became during high school. I was already a paramedic, and that was the early days of paramedics. So I was one of the sort of very, very early initial paramedics before they were a thing. And I enjoyed it, but unfortunately there wasn't much of a job market. Pay wasn't very good. And so I was encouraged to do nursing. I wanted to do medicine most of my childhood growing up and become a doctor, as most kids do. The reality hit home in high school. In South Africa, there were only like 3 or 4 really decent medical schools or universities, and you really had to be a straight A high school student to be able to get in, which I was not. So nursing kind of was like the backup plan. Initially, maybe to do a year or 2 of nursing and then get into medicine that other way. However, after my first year of nursing, and the thing is that nursing training in South Africa, you literally, I think we spent the first 3 months in lectures at the College of Nursing. And then we went to the ward.
Right. Wait, hold on. So you had only been in nursing school for 3 months, meaning like you just graduated from high school 4 months ago. And within 3 months, you were working on the floor?
We went to the ward. So we did the first 3 months of lectures at nursing school was consisted of the fundamentals of nursing science, the beginnings of ethos and professional practice, the beginnings of community health nursing.
Mm-hmm.
And then we started some of the basic sciences. So basic biochemistry, biophysics, and a little bit of anatomy, we had started then. And then after that, 3 months, bam, you hit the wards for 2 months at least.
Wow.
You worked a 40-hour week. Just like everyone else, you were part of a nursing team. We did team nursing, not primary, in that we had one registered nurse, a staff nurse, which we called an enrolled nurse, nursing assistants or enrolled nursing auxiliaries, as they call them over there, and then student nurses of various years. So, I had people from my college who were in various years ahead of me.
Mm-hmm.
So there would be a team of nurses, and you'd be assigned maybe 10 patients in a 32-bed ward. Medicine, some would start on surgical wards, some would start on medical wards. They were separate in that respect. And you would start doing the things that you'd learned in college the first 3 months. So bed baths, mouth care, turning, pressure care, catheter care. The real basic stuff that you learned in the first 3 months, you got to apply. You were part of a nursing team. You had the support from your co-workers. So it was great. And then you would go back to nursing, to college for another 2-3 months at a time and continue your theoretical training, as well as there were clinical times. We had we called it the prac room, which was like a mock-up ward where you do a lot of your procedures and learn to do a lot of your procedures. So that's kind of how nursing school in South Africa went. It was 4 years continuously just nursing. So we're not talking, there was no such thing as doing American history or the history of jazz or some of these random things.
Underwater basket weaving.
Yeah, it's like these random things that I hear about nursing. You did 4 years of solid nursing. And that is because to become a nurse in South Africa back then, I don't know if it's changed now, but you had to also become a registered midwife.
Really?
So you did a full course in midwifery, which I did, and registered with the council, the South African Nursing Council as such. You also had to do a full course as a community health nurse, and that included everything: occupational health care, pediatric primary prevention, immunization, infectious diseases, you name it. And then also a full course in psychiatry leading to the registration as a psychiatric nurse.
Really?
When you finished your 4 years of nursing, you came out as a registered general nurse, psychiatric nurse, midwife, and community health nurse.
Wow. So that's a lot to me, because I think of my own nursing school experience, and we had 2 years of actual in-depth nursing school, because the other 2 years were those prerequisites and other things and whatnot. And I'm curious, I have a couple questions. One, when they put you to work, okay, so you were actually put to work for 3 months or however long it was, working right alongside everybody else. Was that something that was just part of nursing school, or were you paid for that at all? Was that something, how did that work for y'all?
So you were meeting your clinical or practical hours by doing that for the college, or which is part of the the university. Yeah. But the South African Nursing Council, there's only one board as such, and that oversees the whole country. The South African Nursing Council had requirements to meet the requirement for registration in all of those disciplines. So, you got paid to study in South Africa by the South African government, or
really?
The government, or the local state government, which is the government of the Cape Province back then. And so every month I got a salary which covered, I didn't have to pay for my studies. I had to pay for my books, accommodation. My first year was subsidized. But after that, when I moved out of the nurse's home, I had money to pay for my accommodation, to pay for a gym membership.
Right.
The basics, to be able to buy food, that kind of thing. So you got a salary. And the great thing about training then, and I don't know if it's different now, but at the end of the 4 years, you had no debt. You owed nobody.
That's awesome.
Nothing to anybody. You had no debt. at all.
That is phenomenal. I remember the last nursing school debt check that I wrote and how celebratory it was like 10 years later to finally, I felt like I owned my diploma. But to think that you had no debt and you were enabled to go to school and study without the stress of having to provide for yourself or have a job and also to have to work while going to school and do all these things. It really helped you to be free to focus on studying and learning. And that is really, I think, can't be understated how valuable that was for you, I'm sure.
You were socialized from day one, the life and the lifestyle of being a nurse, working 12-hour shifts, working weekends, working public holidays, occasionally during our 4 years, working a full month or two of night shift.
Wow.
So there were no surprises when
you knew what you were getting into.
Kind of knew what you were getting into, you know, and I think that was a benefit. And from day one, when I started my first job, I could walk onto the ward confidently and take care of an assignment of patients.
Yeah, now that is huge. All right, so let's talk about, you graduated, and did you go straight to the OR out of nursing school, or did you go? What did your path look like?
So initially, I mean, I did in my 4 years of nursing. In my fourth year, we actually got assigned by the college. All of us, all 120 of us in our year, got assigned it was usually 2 months in what we call operating theatre nursing. And so you'd go to theatre and instead of working on the wards, you'd work your full 2 months on the clinical time as part of the staff in operating theatre. And during that time, there were practical requirements that you had to meet in terms of, I think it was a minimum of scrubbing 5 cases, pre-op visits, working in the recovery room afterwards, learning how to sterilize and understanding the sterilizing of instruments, at the room, cleaning the room before and after. But I think the biggest thing was becoming socialized and well aware before you even graduated as a nurse, understood what the job entailed and had a solid foundation in aseptic technique and be able to scrub and circulate. Although registered nurses in South Africa then, and I think still today, they don't circulate typically. They scrub and they run the room. They run the theatre from the scrub point of view. They call you the scrub sister, which is the old-fashioned name. But you run the room and you coordinate the care from the back table.
Interesting.
And either a staff nurse or enrolled nurse or nursing assistant as your floor nurse. And they basically fetch things, open things, keep track with your supervision, keep track of the count. Because you're still over, legally, you're responsible for what happens. So that's where it was very, very different. And so when you graduated as a nurse in South Africa, you already had at least 2 months exposure to the specialty, which was incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have one more question, though, about your school experience or about the OR experience. You're talking about the nurse running the room from the scrub position, and somebody else was circulating. Who was doing the charting, or did it have to get done after the case?
You did the chart after the case, and it consisted of a triplicate. It was a 1-page triplicate thing with a few boxes that you checked, and you set the name at the bottom. And you would take the patient to a recovery room or intensive care. I was in cardiothoracic theatre for my whole 2 months, which was great. But so patients typically went to the intensive care. So I would give a handoff in the ICU or occasionally in recovery room. And while I was there, after I given my handoff, I would fill in my paperwork and leave the copy with the recovery room nurse, and then go back and sort my room out, for the next case if there was another one to follow. So that's when you did your paperwork.
Yeah, interesting. Now, did you work after graduation? Did you work in the OR in South Africa as a nurse, or did that wait until you came to the States?
That waited much later in life. I think during my 4 years of nursing, I think because we got exposed to it, I had a strong interest in intensive care and also in trauma. Trauma is a big specialty, and there's a lot of trauma in South Africa. So I got exposed to that, and I wanted to do that first. So sure. I got hired into an intensive care at a private hospital because all of our training was done in the government sector, government hospitals, which is pretty much the backbone of South African healthcare. So did my training and then went into a private hospital ICU, spent a year there, and then went back and did my ICU honors, which is like a 1 year. In order to specialize in anything in South Africa, you actually have to go back to university for at least 1 to 2 years to become a specialist nurse. So I became a critical care nurse specialist. And if you had wanted to work in the operating room and sort of move up and progress, become a shift leader or in charge, or a charge nurse, you had to do the theater course.
Really?
And it was going back to school to become a theater nurse and to specialize, and you would have lectures during that full year, but you would also be spending a certain amount of months working in different specialties. So you'd maybe spend a month working in neuro theater, maybe a year working in gynae theater, a month in orthopedics, maybe a month in cardiothoracics, doing that, and then also taking an exam, which you got licensed at the end with the nursing council. When you took your exam, you got licensed as a nurse specialist in that specialty.
That's cool. It's almost like it sounds so much like our surgeons who go off after residency into a fellowship. It's like this nursing specific fellowship to your specialty. Not that I want everybody to hear me say we all need to go back to school, but dude, that would be really cool to really be educated in our specialty, which I do feel like we get some of when we study for certifications and things, but have that dedicated time to get to know your specialty. That's huge.
Having taken certification exams in the States in intensive care and having done my ICU honors degree in South Africa, you can't compare.
You can't compare. So I need this education is what I'm hearing. So
it's really worthwhile.
All right. So as we were talking about this in light of Perioperative Nurses Week, I'm curious. You did get to see the OR in South Africa and you were there for 2 months. And then when you got to the States and you did eventually transfer into an operating room, what was it like for you in the States versus in South Africa?
Things have changed a lot.
Like what?
Many years later. So when I trained in South Africa, theater nursing was very basic. There wasn't a reliance on technology. There were no computers in theater at all. They just see them. They weren't used for administrative. We still wrote memorandums were still typed up and circulated. They were if you wanted to send a letter or a message to another department, you wrote a letter. So that computers was one thing. You've touched on the documentation. And, triplicate pad that you filled in and you handed it off. I think the other big things were, luckily when I came to the OR at Stanford, the nurses, probably a majority of the nurses scrub. So that was similar to the nurses, scrubbing in South Africa. South Africa doesn't have anyone in the hospital that's not a licensed nurse. So there's no tech positions of any sort. So there's no such thing as a surgical technologist back there because the nurse does everything.
Okay.
So that was one of the big changes. I think it was kind of, everything was linen and everything was recyclable and reprocessable. So the drapes, the gowns, all the silverware, what we would throw, we have our plastic basins and jugs, etc., on the back table in the US. Everything was stainless steel and would all get washed and reprocessed by SPD. in South Africa. So there was very little waste, which I think is a good thing.
You mean not the 16 bags of trash you have at the end of one case for our
case?
Yeah. I've moved out 4 and 5 bags of trash sometimes before I've started a total hip revision before. So yeah, we have a lot of waste. Yeah.
So, and also expense. So cost savings from doing that was much lower than what, we spend in the US. So I think those things were different. The way the theater or the OR was the same. It was pretty much laid out. There was a lot less technology in terms of equipment and machines that we used. In terms of the setups, we didn't use nearly as many trays of instruments. If I remember doing like cabbages and stuff in South Africa, or, learning from my preceptor to scrub cabbages, man, it was a tiny little back table, put in an L-shaped and, a couple of stands. And that was the sum total of our setup.
Wow. I've seen pictures of cabbages for the US OR, so there's a lot of stuff.
It's crazy. So I think we did a lot with less.
With a little,
which is, I think, a good thing. And I think it's potentially the way things are going to go eventually in the States to simplify and cut down costs. But
and sustainability and just looking at ways that we can help with the environmental impact that OR has. One thing I have asked everyone that I've interviewed so far this week, I'm curious because, yes, you speak English in South Africa and you trained in South Africa, but I'm sure that there were communication difficulties from your experience in South Africa and then coming to the OR or to nursing in the States. Did you find that there were differences or communication issues that you struggled with?
I wouldn't say, I think nurses, the training in South Africa makes you very assertive. You definitely have to have a voice over there as a nurse, and you've got a really strong grounding in ethos and professional practice, patient advocacy. Nursing in South Africa is you do it because you want to do it, because there's no money in it. So the people that are very committed to their to what they did, to taking care of patients. It wasn't a job, I think in terms of communication differences, the assertiveness, the ability to, assert yourself and be, fairly firm is good, and have a voice, especially working in theater nursing here in the States. I think being an advocate and being able to say, stop, we're not doing this, or that we're not progressing, to have a voice here is very important, in the operating theater, especially. Communication differences, I think it's pretty much the same.
Pretty much the same. I always wonder too, it's like maybe there's an instrument that you called one thing and then we called it something completely different, but it was really all the same thing, or just, the ways that we refer to different stuff. Sometimes you wonder if, our shared language actually is shared, or if something just, is different.
Sometimes the medications we called lidocaine, we called it lignocaine back in South Africa.
Okay.
Epinephrine generally was referred to as adrenaline, not epinephrine.
Okay.
And then obviously some of the drugs had different trade names that we used. But in the OR, it was a little bit different because we actually had anesthetic nurses who would assist the anesthesiologists, or anesthetists as we call them. And the patients were actually anesthetized in an room adjacent to the theater. They didn't come into the theater itself awake. They're already lined, intubated.
Really?
While we were doing the one case, the next patient was in the anesthetic room next door, having their lines put in and being intubated, basically prepped for surgery. So the moment the other patient had been moved out, the room was clean, the patient would go in and we would start the case, because there was a separate room called a setting room, also built onto the theater, where you as the scrub nurse would be setting up your back tables during the preceding case.
Really?
So literally, as the patient rolled out, the room would be cleaned. everyone would come in and you'd start the case because everything was ready.
Oh my gosh. So wait, so you have a separate room on the OR where your back tables are already open and everything is ready to go. And then as soon as that room is turned over and clean, the next table just rolls in and it's ready?
That's correct.
That's cool.
And when I came to the States and I wasn't working in the OR at the time, but I was exposed to the OR because I'd bring patients in, etc. From, I was a helicopter nurse prior to this. So I saw the layout. I'm like, where's their setting room? Where's the anesthetic or induction room?
It's not here. We don't have that.
And I often speak to anesthesiologists and to, colleagues, and I'm like, that would improve efficiency so much if we had that kind of setup. Yeah. Because basically it halves or even it decreases your turnover. Basically, your room just has to be cleaned. That's it.
Wow. That is so... I have learned something new every day this week as we have talked to people from other countries and seeing how surgery and surgical care is done somewhere else. And it's, we get into our, maybe sometimes with our blinders on or get into our silos and think that OR nursing only looks like how we see it in the States, or it only looks like how we see it in these other countries where we've worked. And then you hear people from around the world talking and you hear how it can be other places. And you're like, oh, we can learn from each other. We can maybe implement something new or find another way of doing things. I love that. I love hearing these things.
We're doing things so more efficiently, forget the whole turnover stuff. I mean, there's even a better way than this, but
that is phenomenal.
Planning, you have to design your facility to facilitate that.
Yeah, and staff appropriately, of course, and have all the people that you need, which is always a struggle, I know. Well, as we bring this interview to a close for today, I think I could talk to you all day because this is just fascinating. But I'm curious. We are celebrating Perioperative Nurses Week, and I would love to hear from you. Do you have any advice or encouragement that you want to share to any of the OR nurses who may be watching it, or even somebody thinking about going into the OR? What would you tell them?
I would say, and having been a nurse for probably 32 years now, having worked in ICU for many years, having been a flight nurse for 19 years and a trauma ER nurse, I would say that OR nursing is the best kept secret.
Oh, that is an excellent answer.
I really believe it. In terms of having one patient at a time that you focus on, in terms of having the ability to also scrub, so your technical skills and know-how is, and that part of your brain that is stimulated and you feel involved in the actual surgical care of a patient, making anatomy come to life through that, coordinating the patient's care. I think every day, and I share that special moment with the patient before I take them back. And to know, and they look at me and in their eyes that they trust you 100% with their lives. And for me, that's humbling. I've always said it's a privilege for me to be a nurse, and literally to make a difference in our patients' lives. And I think that's what's sustained me for 32 years. I mean, I hear nurses wanting to quit, new nurses, they said something like 35% of new grads are quitting within the first few years of their career. And honestly, what I can say, what sustains me and what's kept me going for 32 years is having a passion for patients, never mind the job and everything else, but the passion for patients, and to take care of them and to understand the extreme privilege that we have to do so. That's what makes every single day worth it. And you and I have shared stories of how we hellish days.
Oh, yeah.
And we just want to go home and have a drink. And I tell you, but that is what sustains us in the long term and keeps us going. My colleagues have been in the OR. One just retired after 45 years. She said exactly the same thing. She says, that's what makes every day worth it. So I say focus on, if for want of a better word, focus on your vocation, focus on your why for being a nurse daily. because that's what will keep you going. That's what will keep your spirit and your fire. Because God knows we're living in difficult times in terms of nursing and hospital practice. So there's so much that demoralizes. So focus on that. Yeah. Keep that spirit alive through doing that, because the patients, if nobody else appreciates it, the patients really do.
Yeah. And that is ultimately what matters. And keeping our focus straight helps keep everything in perspective for why we do what we do. So Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today.
So honored, so grateful for this opportunity, and look forward to chatting again.
Absolutely. Well, that is going to do it for today and for our Spotlight for today. Tune in tomorrow for another Nurse Spotlight. I'm your host, Melanie Perry, and on behalf of our whole team, thanks for tuning in to First Case.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of First Case. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to First Case on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on iPhone or Android. Simply search for First Case in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@firstcasemedia.com. We look forward to hearing from you.